Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Recently, via the community tab of this channel, I asked you, would you want to talk about Linkin Park? Is that something you're down with? I asked you, hey, do you want to talk more specifically about their upcoming album From Zero? And I also asked you, for the purposes of this video today, would you be interested in a reviewing every Linkin Park album style video? A video in which we talk about every single album released up to this point from this iconic and highly influential and successful alternative rock and metal crew. And the results of this poll that we conducted in order to get a consensus, they were, how do I put this? They were very... It was rigged, I say! Rigged by fake metalheads and pussy posers and liberal twinks and Dominion voting and Joe Biden and Venezuela! Oh my god, no! No! I was gonna say interesting! The results were interesting! What are you talking about? And why would you choose today, of all days, to talk like that? There ain't no goddamn way that a single self-respecting metalhead, let alone a majority of them, would vote to talk about this beta male, saggy pants, mopey dopey soy boy bullshit from Stinkin' Park. No way, period, fake news, I demand a recount! Okay, well, 66% of the Metal Meltdown audience said, yeah, let's do it. And 34% of the Metal Meltdown audience said, nah, I don't really feel like it. And I don't know, this might be brand new information for you, Mr. Thrashin' Jackson, but 66 is a bigger number than 34. Well, I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. Oh no, a hyper-online, obnoxious metal elitist doesn't like something? What are the odds? Boo-hoo! Tough titties. We're talking about Linkin Park. Go fuck yourself. As per the norm with these reviewing every album style videos, I am not interested in EPs, demos, live albums, or compilations, or anything released by any kind of solo project or side project. I am interested only in studio albums released by Linkin Park, and I will be talking about each one in order of release, assigning each a score out of 5, 0 obviously being the worst, and 5 obviously being the best. So for some reason, all throughout the video, I refer to the Warner Brothers Incorporated record label as Warner Brothers Interactive. I have no idea why. I must have misread the name of the record label. I mean, that's obviously what happened. Why I never figured it out and went, oh, wait a minute, I can't tell you. I'm just going to chalk it up to me being a dum-dum. So yeah, just a heads up. Make a little drinking game out of it. Every time I say Warner Brothers Interactive, have a little friendly shot. First up, we have Hybrid Theory, released in October 2000 via Warner Brothers Incorporated, inarguably one of the most iconic, influential, and successful rock or metal or alternative music albums of the 21st century, and 24 years after its release, I can very honestly say, it's easy to see why. It's a pretty fucking good record. I was like barely 6 years old when this album came out, and I wasn't really aware of it, and probably a bit too young to really enjoy or appreciate anything about it. I wasn't really aware of rock music at this time, at this age, aside from some stuff I had heard in like, you know, movies and stuff my dad had introduced me to. I remember kind of getting into Linkin Park a little bit in middle school, and specifically some songs from this album, but it was more so because everyone else I knew was listening to Linkin Park because they were such a big band at this time. It wasn't really so much because I was really fucking with it. And then when I was actually getting into a lot of metal and alternative music, I really was like a full-blown Thrashin' Jackson style metal elitist. Like, if it wasn't 80s metal or classic death and thrash metal, I did not give a single flying fuck. And I bring this up because despite technically being there when this album came out, and despite being at an age where this music would have and should have resonated with me, it never really did until now. Now, that's not to say that this record is perfect. I still think it's kind of edgy and immature and juvenile in some aspects. I also think that the impact of some of these songs has been unintentionally, but nevertheless diluted by years and years of memes and edgy jokes. But that aside, looking at the album for what it is and looking at what it's kind of trying to capture and convey, I think it is pretty successful. I think Chester Bennington is fantastic on vocals across the board. His screams are fucking massive. A lot of great melodies and hooks. A lot of thick, solid fucking riffage here. Even if it's not the most dynamic or visceral, it does a good job at kind of like building and elevating the music. It makes for fun material. It makes for music that clearly still resonates with people all these years. Like, people still love One Step Closer, In the End, Paper Cuts, Points of Authority, and maybe, I will argue, a part of it is probably because of that nostalgic attachment, but I mean, hey, at the same time, there are probably a lot of, like, young adults and teenagers listening to this kind of stuff right now. I think the only thing that doesn't really work for me, and this isn't just an issue with Hybrid Theory, it's an issue with a lot of these Linkin Park records, it's a lot of the lyricism that you see specifically in, like, the rap, hip-hop inspired verses and flows. Like, I'm fine with the fact that Linkin Park is not getting super deep into things, but simultaneous to that, a lot of the rap and hip-hop lyricism is just kind of like, yo, you underestimated me, but you could have estimated me. You could have done this, you could have done that. Now I'm feeling bad, now I'm feeling sad. One day soon, and keep in mind, I'm doing my best, and I'm doing fine. Like, it's giving me nothing. You know, Chester Bennington is giving me everything, these melodies, these hooks, these screams, boom. But these rap flows, they're giving me nothing. I'm feeling a very enthusiastic 3.5 out of 5. It's not something that I'm personally going to return to super duper often, but I respect what this album has done. I respect what it is, and I think that people who want to just listen to, like, some edgy fucking alt-rock and metal and who just want to, like, go back to those fucking, like, nostalgic adolescent years, I think this will make a nice, fun little time capsule. For young people, too, that are getting into rock and metal and alternative music, I think it's kind of a fantastic gateway album because it exposes you to a bunch of different sounds and ideas kind of all at the same time in a manner that isn't as overwhelming or as potentially frightening as maybe like a death or a black metal record. I know that a lot of people are going to jump on me for not giving this a 5 out of 5, and that's fine. If this truly is a perfect album for you, that's great, that's awesome. But just because it's a perfect album for you doesn't mean it's a perfect album for me. It's a good album, but I'm sorry, it's not perfect. Not in my opinion, at least. Next up, we have Meteora, released in March 2003 via Warner Brothers Interactive and Machine Shop Records. And honestly, you can probably copy and paste a lot of what I said about Hybrid Theory and like the musical content of that album and apply it here. This is extremely similar to that album, almost a repeat a lot of ways, I would say, of that specific style and sound and attitude. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if you loved Hybrid Theory, then you're obviously probably going to love this record. For someone like me, it's a bit of a bummer, listening to these albums back to back and maybe looking for a little bit more growth, maybe looking for something a little bit more spicy and funky and exciting. But you know what? The songs still go occasionally pretty hard, and it still does what it needs and wants to do pretty well, so I don't really see much of a reason to really argue here. Like Faint, Breaking the Habit, Nobody's Listening, Somewhere I Belong, Numb, some of the band's most iconic songs, arguably as and maybe even more iconic than some of the stuff from Hybrid Theory. Like, when I think Linkin Park, Numb is literally one of the first songs that comes to my mind. And the same energy and momentum and emotional authenticity and simplicity that you get and that you want from an album like Hybrid Theory is maintained here as well. Still very well produced. I'm still not feeling a lot of the rap stuff, but hey, fuck it, whatever. It could definitely benefit from a few stylistic deviations just so it doesn't feel like Hybrid Theory Part 2, essentially. But for a lot of people, Hybrid Theory Part 2 sounds pretty fucking awesome, so screw it. I'm gonna go for 3.5 out of 5 on this one as well. I've got a real funny feeling I'm gonna get shit for not giving Meteora a higher score as well. Whew, we'll see. This should be interesting. Next up, we have Minutes to Midnight, released in May 2007, once again via Warner Brothers Interactive and Machine Shop Records. This is the band's first collaboration with the controversial but ultimately and inarguably successful, legendary, Grammy Award-winning producer Rick Rubin, and I think it's fair to say a fairly successful collaboration at that. This big hit record for the band, a lot of big hit singles. This is kind of where I, as a wee little babu baby, start to pay attention to Linkin Park. I remember the song What I've Done was in the credits to the Transformers movie. This album has a more streamlined and stripped down kind of presentation and sound to it. Like, lyrically and conceptually not much has changed, but it's definitely a lot less metal. Like, with the previous two albums, you can safely describe them as nu metal and alternative metal. This one, not so much. There's a bigger emphasis on bigger melodies, there's a lot more polish and sizzle across the board, and for me at least, this makes for a slightly less interesting listening experience. Not necessarily a bad one, but, you know, I don't think the songs are as impactful or as memorable as stuff that I would have heard from Hybrid Theory or Meteora. Now, that said, I concede there are at least a couple of genuine big hits. I mean, the aforementioned What I've Done, again, even if it's been diluted by the Transformers franchise and memes and shit, you know, it is kind of a bop. I can't lie. You play that at karaoke, I might sing along. And honestly, Bleed It Out is one of my favorite Linkin Park songs. Like, I like this kind of, like, punk, rap rock kind of direction, and I like the energy of this song, and I love how it just kind of grows and builds upon a really simplistic foundation, and, you know, Chester eventually just lets out these insane fucking glass-shattering shrieks and screams. But, I mean, softer stuff like Leave Out All the Rest and Hands Held High, these don't resonate with me at all. This just frankly bores me. I think it's kind of corny and sappy, and it just has me rolling my eyes. The closing number, The Little Things Give You Away, I think is kind of charming. Like, it's got a nice, pleasant feel and atmosphere to it. Maybe still also a little corny, but like in an endearing, nice, pleasant way. I think for me, this is honestly a 2.5 out of 5. It's okay. Couple great songs, couple not great songs, and a bunch of stuff that's just kind of in the middle. I'm not really a huge fan of this more streamlined, stripped down kind of approach, but clearly I'm in the minority because this was a huge hit. So, yeah, I don't know. It is what it is. Next up, we have 1,000 Suns, released in September 2010 via Warner Brothers Interactive and Machine Shop Records once again. And fun fact, this was the first time I had listened to this album in its entirety, all the way through, and I'm happy to report that I feel like I'm seeing in this album the growth and the maturity and the diversity and the impact that I wanted from Minutes to Midnight and even Meteora. Like, finally, I feel like Linkin Park is actually doing something a little bit different, kind of combining things that they've done across these other albums with new ideas, bringing in more influence from alternative rock and electronic music as well, and kind of wrapping it all in a conceptual ribbon, talking about nuclear war and using, like, actual audio samplings and quotes from, like, Oppenheimer as well. Despite that, it's not a total doom and gloom bummer of a record. Like, it actually does have a lot more optimism than I would expect from an album with this kind of concept and story. And on top of that, I just think a lot of the songs are a lot more engaging and a lot more effective. Like, songs like Waiting for the End and Burning the Skies, I think have some really nice, like, sonic textures and melodic components. It kind of reminds me of, like, some indie and alt-rock of the time. I also really like Wretches and Kings, which has a slightly dirtier kind of vibe and feel to it, with, like, some heavier electronic thumps and beats, going for more of a full-blown kind of hip-hop feel as well. When They Come For Me is a pretty cool song too, like some of the different grooves that are implemented here. The Catalyst is a genuinely great song, and that does a great job too at bringing back some of those heavier Linkin Park shades and vibes as well. Even some of the, like, ambient instrumental interludes across the record, I think do a pretty decent job at, like, actually contributing to the atmosphere and the theme of the record, which is not something I can normally say for any interlude on any fucking record, so congrats on that end, Linkin Park, unironically. I'm honestly feeling a 4 out of 5 on this, you know? Like, don't get me wrong, the other records have their fun moments, and they've got lots of energy and shit, but, like, this is more my style. Like, this is where I'm seeing just a lot more originality and imagination on display. I feel like there's a lot more to say. I feel like the songs are very captivating. And honestly, from a production standpoint, a very underrated and underappreciated record from Rick Rubin. Like, I'm impressed here. I like its very clean, spacious finish and feel. It's cinematic when it needs to be. It's very atmospheric when it needs to be. Next up, we have Living Things, released in June 2012 via Warner Brothers Interactive and Machine Shop Records. And I'm not feeling this at all. I was just pretty flat out bored by this. I'm not even gonna fucking lie to you. I don't think it's like actively fucking terrible. I don't think it's like objectively bad, but god damn is it fucking weak. Part of the problem is it's trying too hard to mesh a bunch of ideas from other Linkin Park albums into something here while bringing in more electronic influence, and the result is something that just feels kind of incohesive and jumbled. And it doesn't help that the songs themselves, just for me at least, aren't very good. Like, there aren't any interesting beats or riffs or melodies across this whole thing, and to me, it reads as Linkin Park just kind of like phoning it in. Like, there are no memorable, interesting progressions, hooks, different passages. I thought everything was really predictable, really formulaic, and really clumsy. The balance of rap and rock is really off here. Like, I'm not a huge fan of the rap elements of Linkin Park regardless, but I'm really not feeling them specifically on this record. Like, it just flat out does not work for me. I'm not feeling this record. I tried. I'm giving it like a 2 out of 5. I honestly think it's pretty mediocre. I think I remember like listening to this album back in the day and just being like really fucking bored by it really fucking quickly too. Just like, who gives a shit? And unfortunately, unlike Hybrid Theory, this album has not grown on me with age, it seems. So, yeah. Next up, we have The Hunting Party, released in June 2014 via Warner Brothers Interactive and Machine Shop Records. And believe it or not, this is my favorite Linkin Park album. I think this is a very underrated and underappreciated album all the way through. I think it's their most dynamic. I think it's their most unique in terms of how it was produced and in terms of like the actual sound that they're going for and executing. From what I understand, unlike previous albums, nothing was written in advance. They all kind of went into the studio and it was a blank slate and they just worked together. And I think that this makes for a more organic and collaborative songwriting process, and that shows all the way through. This is also more aggressive. Like, I feel like they're pulling more from like hardcore punk and like alternative rock and metal from the late 80s and early 90s, and this kind of makes for a cool mishmash of like post-hardcore, alternative metal, and like some of those ideas that are still there from like Minutes to Midnight and Meteora meshing in as well. A lot of different special guests and collaborators across the record as well, bringing in their own ideas and spices and further fleshing out this sound and making it feel more unique. Like, you've got Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine, Darren Malakian from System of a Down, Paige Hamilton from Helmet, the rapper Rakim, songwriter Emile Haney, who's worked with everyone from Eminem to Kanye West, the Rolling Stones, Lana Del Rey, Bruno Mars, Adele. It's got a really good amount of aggression and emotion and great cohesion and flow to it. I just really enjoy this record. I mean, sure, maybe it doesn't have like these massive choruses like that I would expect from some of the other Linkin Park records, but it's just more consistent all the way through, more engaging for me personally. Like, I'm really digging that kind of like alt-punk rap post-hardcore charge of stuff like All for Nothing, Guilty All the Same, Keys to the Kingdom. I also enjoy more evocative, dramatic, slow-burning moments and melodies from like Until It's Gone. Even something like Final Masquerade, which kind of brings us back to that more stripped-down, streamlined rock sound of Minutes to Midnight, I think it's a pretty solid cut. And honestly, something like A Line in the Sand is a lot more urgent and heavy than it probably has the right to be, you know? Like, it really takes its time to build up to something really exciting, and in its final moments, it unleashes with whirlwinds of, like, shredding guitar pyrotechnics and some really fucking aggressive vocals and these really kind of punky, almost thrashy, dare I say, even barrages. I do think the album would benefit from a slightly meatier guitar tone, but I mean, overall, I really enjoy this record. I actually really liked it back in the day. Like, I thought it was pretty fucking cool, and I still enjoy it now. I'm feeling a very enthusiastic 4 out of 5. This is my favorite Linkin Park record. No bullshit. I really enjoyed it. Like, I get it, Hybrid Theory, Meteora, I mean, it's got that nostalgia factor for a lot of y'all, and it's got way bigger hooks, I'll give you that. But this is more interesting, this is heavier, this is more exciting, this is more dynamic, more diverse, all the way through. Like, this is, if Thousand Suns is silver medal, this is the gold medal. For me, at least. And finally, this brings us to what many considered was Linkin Park's final album, One More Light, released in May 2017 via Warner Brothers Interactive and Machine Shop Records. Damn, these motherfuckers were tight. All right, where do I even begin with this one? Holy shit. Okay, so there are a couple of things we need to establish. This is one of the most important and divisive albums in the Linkin Park discography, First off, because it's a full-blown pop record. Let's just get that out of the way. It's Linkin Park's infamous endeavor into full-blown commercial mainstream pop music. And I remember at the time, the reaction was pretty mixed. Obviously, it was a hit. Obviously, it had, big singles, and obviously it sold well. But, a lot of people didn't like this fucking record. And I remember being one of them at the time. It is also worth noting and remembering that this was the last album that Linkin Park wrote and made and released with Chester Bennington as their lead singer, as he unfortunately took his own life just a couple of months after the release of this album. And I think that when I look at it objectively, it's hard not to hear a very generic, very predictable, very paint-by-numbers pop record. It is very safe, very clean, very sanitized, very bland. A lot of the same kind of like boom, boom, clap rhythms and beats that you would hear in every indie or pop song in the early to mid 2010s. Just a bland, ultimately forgettable kind of millennial pop record. Like, if this wasn't Linkin Park, and if what happened didn't happen, I don't think we'd even be talking about this record in any capacity. Like, nobody would give a shit. It would be lost to the sands of time. But on the flip side, with the knowledge that this is Chester's final record, and with the knowledge that he probably put everything possible into this record to make it what it is, it's hard not to imagine something a little bit more passionate. Like, maybe the music isn't amazing, maybe the production isn't amazing, but Chester, to his credit, genuinely works really hard to sell this material. Like, if there were better songs and this thing was better produced and presented, maybe Chester Bennington could have put together like an actually great pop record. And I will also say that some songs, like Sorry for Now, One More Light, even if they're not the most dynamic or the most powerful, I do think that there is a little bit more of an emotional impact and oomph because of what has happened, because of the tragedy, because Chester put so much into this idea and concept. Ultimately, and unfortunately, I'm just not a huge fan of this record, but not so much because it's a pop record, more so because, in my opinion, it's just not a great pop record. But I will say that what it lacks in personality and creativity, it makes up for in heart and soul. Linkin Park did their homework. They were paying attention to what was happening in pop music at that time, and they did their best to try to bring Linkin Park into that world, and Chester vocally is putting his all into this record. It is not unfair to argue that this is vocally one of his most passionate records with any band. I'm unfortunately going to give this a 2 out of 5, and I'm unfortunately going to have to argue that this is Linkin Park's worst album, but I do see the intent. I do hear and feel the heart and soul of the emotion, and I can definitely see why years later this would resonate with somebody, why this would really have an emotional impact with somebody. And I mean, I can kind of feel it myself even on the title track, even if just for like a brief moment. Like, Chester really cared about this material, and even if it didn't pan out for me, it is what it is. And yeah. And voila! Reviewing every Linkin Park album. Wow, crazy, cool, we did it. I actually enjoyed this. I enjoyed revisiting some of these albums. I enjoyed listening to some of them for the first time all the way through. Now it's your turn to tell me, did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? What's their best album? What's their worst album? How would you rank everything in their discography? Please do so in the comments below or on Discord. If you prefer, we've got a solid community there. Join us on Discord, link in the bio. By the way, subscribe, other videos, stay tuned next weekend for a From Zero album review, and as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.